At 7:44 in the evening on Saturday, March 21st, Donald Trump posted 11 words from his Florida home that set a countdown timer over the entire global economy. If Iran doesn't fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. That deadline expires at 7:44 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, March 23rd. In Tehran, that is 3:14 in the morning on Tuesday. And as of right now, Iran has not opened the strait. Iran has not backed down. Iran has not signaled any intention of compliance. Instead, Iran's military responded within hours with a counter-threat that raises the stakes of this standoff to a level that nobody in the global energy markets, in the Gulf states, or in the European governments desperately scrambling for gas supplies was prepared for. Iran's armed forces headquarters declared that if the United States follows through on Trump's ultimatum, the Strait of Hormuz will be completely closed and will not be reopened until every destroyed Iranian power plant is rebuilt. The clock is ticking. And the consequences of what happens when it runs out touch every person on this planet. Before we examine what Iran has threatened in response and what bombing Iranian power plants would actually mean for the world, we need to understand exactly what drove Trump to post that ultimatum Saturday night, because the context matters enormously and it has been almost completely buried under the breaking news cycle. On Friday morning, Trump posted on Truth Social that the United States was getting very close to meeting its objectives and was considering winding down military efforts in the Middle East. That was Friday. Less than 36 hours later, he threatened to obliterate Iranian power plants. The whiplash between those two positions tells you something important about the pressure the Trump administration is under. Gas prices in the United States have risen 93 cents per gallon since this war began. Retail gas prices hit their highest national average since October 2022. U.S. crude oil has risen more than 70% since the start of the year. Goldman Sachs published an analysis suggesting those triple-digit oil prices could persist until 2027. The war was supposed to be quick. The war was supposed to be over. And the economic pain it is inflicting on American consumers is now a political liability that threatens Republican control of Congress in the November midterm elections. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed to enemy traffic for 23 days. Approximately 20% of the world's oil normally passes through that narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. That is 15 to 20 million barrels of crude oil per day. That flow has been reduced to a trickle. Iran has been attacking any commercial vessel attempting to transit and has hit more than 21 ships since the war began. The International Energy Agency called it the largest oil supply disruption in the history of global markets. The administration has tried releasing 400 million barrels from strategic reserves globally. It has lifted the Jones Act. It has temporarily lifted sanctions on Iranian oil already loaded on tankers. It has lifted sanctions on Russian crude. None of it has been enough. Brent crude settled above $112 a barrel on Friday. U.S. crude rose more than 2% in a single day. European gas prices have surged. Developing nations are being crushed. Zimbabwe's fuel prices topped $2 per liter for the first time ever as a direct consequence of this war. The economic pressure on the Trump administration to produce a visible result on Hormuz has become so intense that the President of the United States issued a 48-hour ultimatum from his vacation home in Florida at 7:44 on a Saturday night. Now let us talk about what Iran said in response, because the counter-threat issued by Iran's armed forces headquarters is not merely defiant. It is a specific, precise, and operationally credible escalation threat that redefines what this conflict could become. Iran's military said directly that if its fuel and energy infrastructure is violated by the enemy, all energy, information technology, and desalination infrastructure belonging to the U.S. and its allies in the region will be targeted. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, posted on social media that vital infrastructure as well as energy and oil infrastructure across the Middle East could be irreversibly destroyed should Iranian power plants be targeted. He said the retaliation would increase the price of oil for a long time. And Iran's military added that the power plants of regional countries hosting U.S. bases will be legitimate targets. Iranian semi-official news outlets published a map of power plants across the Gulf region with the warning, "Say goodbye to electricity." Read that sequence again carefully. If America bombs Iranian power plants, Iran has said it will target desalination infrastructure across the Gulf. The Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, and Bahrain, rely on desalination plants for the majority of their freshwater supplies. The Persian Gulf has almost no natural freshwater. Desalination is not a convenience. It is survival infrastructure. Attacking desalination plants across the Gulf would not be a geopolitical escalation. It would be a humanitarian catastrophe on a scale that would dwarf everything that has happened in this war so far. Millions of people in some of the world's wealthiest and most strategically important countries would face immediate water security crises. And Iran has now formally stated in official military communication that this is a declared target category if Trump follows through on his power plant ultimatum. To understand the full weight of what bombing Iranian power plants would mean, you need to understand the difference between the types of targets that have been struck so far in this war and what power plants represent as a category. The United States and Israel have been striking military targets, nuclear enrichment infrastructure, leadership figures, missile production facilities, naval vessels, and energy export infrastructure like oil fields and gas processing plants. These are all targets with direct military or economic warfare rationale. Power plants are something fundamentally different. A power plant is civilian infrastructure. Its primary purpose is providing electricity to homes, hospitals, schools, businesses, and civilian industry. Trump himself acknowledged the civilian implications when he said earlier this month, on March 11th, that the U.S. could take apart Iran's electric capacity within 1 hour, and it would take them 25 years to rebuild. He said at the time, ideally, we are not going to be doing that. Something changed between March 11, when Trump said, ideally, we would not do that, and March 21, when Trump said we will obliterate their power plants. What changed is 10 more days of Hormuz closure, 10 more days of oil above $100 per barrel, 10 more days of Iran hitting ships in the Strait, 10 more days of American consumers paying more at the pump. The economic pressure overrode the restraint, and the 48-hour ultimatum is the result. Iran's largest power plant by capacity is not Bushehr. The Bushehr nuclear power plant on the Persian Gulf produces approximately 1,000 megawatts and has been the most discussed in the context of this conflict because it is nuclear and because a projectile struck its premises on March 17th, though the IAEA confirmed no damage to the core facility. A strike on an operating nuclear reactor like Bushehr carries radiation risk that IAEA Director Rafael Grossi has described as crossing the reddest line of nuclear safety. Approximately 480 Russian technicians from Rosatom are currently stationed at Bushehr. A strike on a facility with Russian nationals inside it would not be a strike on Iran alone. It would be a direct attack on Russian citizens operating on Russian-supplied infrastructure. The geopolitical implications of that single scenario alone are staggering. The Damavand combined cycle gas power plant near Tehran is Iran's largest power plant by actual electricity generation capacity, significantly exceeding Bushehr. It serves the capital city directly. Destroying Damavand would mean darkness across Tehran, a city of approximately 9 million people. No hospital electricity, no water pumping systems, no refrigeration for food and medicine. In a city already living through 23 days of war, internet blackout, aerial bombardment, and economic collapse, removing electricity from 9 million civilians would constitute the kind of collective punishment that international humanitarian law explicitly prohibits regardless of the military justification offered. Iran's Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian responded to Trump's ultimatum on Sunday by saying that threats and terror only strengthen our unity. He said the illusion of erasing Iran from the map shows desperation against the will of a history-making nation. He said the Strait of Hormuz is open to all except those who violate our soil. The Iranian president's framing reflects the same position Iran has held since the first day of this war. Tehran does not see itself as losing. It sees itself as successfully imposing economic pain on America and its allies, sustaining its government despite the killing of its supreme leader and most of its senior officials, demonstrating new missile capabilities like the Diego Garcia launch, and maintaining the Hormuz leverage that is its primary strategic instrument against a military it cannot match in conventional terms. And here's the fundamental strategic problem with Trump's power plant ultimatum that makes it more dangerous than almost any previous threat in this war. The threat has a deadline. Deadlines in international confrontations create binary outcomes. Either Iran complies before 7:44 p.m., Monday, and Trump can claim a victory, or Iran does not comply, and Trump either carries out his threat or backs down. If Trump carries out the threat, Iran has committed to completely closing Hormuz and attacking desalination and power infrastructure across the entire Gulf region. If Trump backs down after the deadline passes without compliance, he will have issued the most public ultimatum of this war and retreated from it, which would be interpreted across the Middle East, in Tehran, in Beijing, in Moscow, and in every capital that is watching this conflict as a demonstration that American ultimatums in this war do not have to be taken seriously. There is no clean exit from a public 48-hour ultimatum with a specific deadline. This is the trap that getting into a war without a clear endgame creates, when the military tools available cannot produce the specific result you need. In this case, getting Iran to voluntarily reopen Hormuz to all traffic, including American and allied ships. You escalate to a new threat. And the new threat either works, which produces the result, but requires Iran to publicly submit to American ultimatums in a way that its government has shown zero willingness to do in 23 days of warfare, or it does not work, and the cycle of escalation continues to the next level. Iran's parliament speaker Ghalibaf said something this morning that frames Tehran's strategic calculation precisely. He said that if Israel is unable to intercept missiles in the heavily protected Dimona area, it is operationally a sign of entering a new phase of the battle. He is referring to Saturday night's strikes on Dimona and Arad in southern Israel, cities near the Negev Nuclear Research Center. Over 100 Israelis were wounded in those strikes. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu called it a very difficult evening in the battle for our future. For the first time in 23 days of war, Iranian missiles broke through Israeli air defenses and struck the area immediately adjacent to Israel's main nuclear research facility. This was the highest number of people injured in a single Iranian attack since the war began. Iran is telling the world that its missile capability, despite 23 days of degradation, can still penetrate Israel's most heavily defended airspace. The convergence of these events on the same day, Trump's power plant ultimatum from Florida, Iran's broken-through strikes on Dimona, Iran's counter-threat about desalination infrastructure, Iran's declaration that Hormuz will be completely closed if the ultimatum is executed, and the 48-hour deadline now counting down to Monday evening, represents the most dangerous 48 hours of this entire war. Because unlike every previous threat and counter-threat in this conflict, this one has a specific expiration time, and the world is watching the clock. Goldman Sachs says oil prices could stay elevated through 2027, regardless of what happens in the next 48 hours, because the physical damage to Gulf energy infrastructure is already done. Qatar's Ras Laffan will take 3 to 5 years to restore 17% of its LNG capacity. Kuwait's Mina Al Ahmadi refinery has been struck twice. Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery took damage. UAE energy facilities have been shut down and damaged. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for 23 days. The global energy system has absorbed damage that does not reverse the moment a ceasefire is called. The economic consequences of this war are already locked in for years to come, regardless of what happens when the clock runs out. But what happens in the next 48 hours will determine whether those consequences are measured in years or in something far more severe. If Trump's ultimatum triggers a strike on Iranian power plants, and if Iran follows through on its stated commitment to completely close Hormuz and destroy desalination infrastructure across the Gulf, the world enters an energy and humanitarian emergency that has no modern precedent. There is no historical comparison for a coordinated attack on the water supply infrastructure of an entire region. Iran published that map of Gulf power plants and said, "Say goodbye to electricity." That is not a rhetorical flourish. That is a declared operational intention attached to a specific trigger condition that expires Monday evening. The next 48 hours are the most consequential since this war began on February 28th. And this time, unlike every previous development, there is a specific deadline, a specific commitment, and a specific consequence that the entire world knows about and is watching. Subscribe right now, because when that deadline hits, this channel will have the coverage you need to understand what just happened and what it means. Tell me in the comments, do you think Iran will open the strait before the deadline, or do you believe Trump will follow through and strike the power plants when the clock runs out?